All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today we're exploring something incredibly unique. It's a profoundly personal, deeply meticulous look at primary religious texts by a writer named Agha Bilal Murad Muhammad Khan Kazilbash. And I want to be clear right up front. This isn't your standard theological takedown, not at all. Instead, it's this fascinating window into a mind that is earnestly, almost desperately, seeking the truth, strictly using primary text to reason things out.
So the framing of this entire document is absolutely crucial to understand. Bilal is actually writing this from a place of chronic physical pain. He's literally navigating a severe health crisis, and he leans on what he describes as his own autistic clarity to process these ancient texts. He explicitly rejects those ego-driven, circular debates we see all the time. Instead, he's just inviting us to look at his transparent pursuit of truth. I love how he puts it. He says, think of this like a student turning in their scratch paper. He's not trying to pick a fight, he just wants to show his work.
One of the first things Bilal tackles is this popular apologetic argument known as the Islamic Dilemma, which is put forward by a commentator named David Wood. Basically, Wood's premise assumes the Qur'an validates the Bible as this single, completely unaltered document exactly as we have it today. But Bilal steps back and points out a massive foundational flaw in that thinking. He notes that the Qur'an confirms the original divine revelations given directly to the prophets, not the later documents that were compiled, edited, and translated by councils of men centuries down the line. It's a vital distinction between a pure divine message and a human compilation.
And this builds into a really fascinating linguistic point. Let's think about the word gospel, or euangelion in the original Greek. It literally just means good news. Bilal strips away centuries of heavy theology to point out that the good news was originally a living, spoken revelation of truth given to Jesus. It wasn't a physically bound book that he handed out. In Bilal's view, this good news was the exact same incredibly simple message carried by every single prophet, all the way from Abraham to Moses to Jesus. Now, here's a brilliant illustration of how language can accidentally cause division. Take the word Allah. It quite literally just means the worshipped one, and it shares the exact same ancient Semitic root as the Hebrew words El and Elohim, which you'll find all throughout the Torah. I mean, Arab Christians have been saying Allah in their prayers for over 2,000 years. They're all pointing to the exact same ultimate reality. They're just using the native tongue of their region. Which brings us to the monumental question at the heart of Bilal's scratch paper. Did Jesus actually claim to be God? Remember, Bilal isn't looking at later theological councils to answer this. He skips all that and goes straight to the primary scriptures to systematically figure out where the claims of Jesus' divinity actually came from. For example, let's look at one of the most famous verses used to claim divinity, John 10:30. I and the Father are one. Bilal puts on his analytical hat and points out that the specific Greek word used there for one, the word hen, actually implies a unity of purpose and will. And how does he prove that? Well, just a few chapters later in John 17, Jesus prays for his disciples to be one using that exact same word. By that logic, if it meant being literally God, then all the disciples would become God too. So for Bilal, this oneness is clearly about alignment and total surrender, not literal identity. To really anchor this, Bilal stacks up the evidence straight from the Torah. And when you look at it this way, it's completely unambiguous. Numbers 23 says, God is not a man. Hosea 11 says, I am God and not a man. Isaiah 46 declares, I am God and there is no other. Plus, you have the Shema in Deuteronomy establishing absolute oneness. He's showing that any theology requiring God to become a man fundamentally contradicts God's own first-person declarations in the foundational texts. This completely reframes the concept of idol worship, or shirk in Arabic. Bilal expands this idea way beyond just bowing down to ancient stone statues. He argues that idol worship is really about taking anything finite or created and placing it in the position that belongs solely to the infinite creator. So, elevating anything created, even an incredibly beloved righteous prophet, technically violates that very first commandment. Okay, but I know what you're probably thinking. What about John 8:58? How does Bilal explain Jesus saying, before Abraham was, I am? Because that specific phrase is heavily cited as the ultimate undeniable proof of Jesus claiming the divine name for himself. Let's see how his scratch paper breaks this down. He explains it through a really profound concept found in multiple traditions, the pre-existence of the soul. He compares God telling Jeremiah, before I formed you in the womb I knew you, with the Quranic covenant of Alast. That's the idea that every single soul made a covenant with God before ever entering this physical world. So Jesus' soul, just like all of ours, existed in God's knowledge before time even began. In this framework, Jesus isn't claiming to be God. He's a soul that is fully awake to this pre-existent reality. He actually draws this beautiful connection between that I am declaration and the Sufi chant, Allahu, which means the worshipped one is. Bilal notes that saying I am in this context isn't some arrogant claim to exclusive divinity. Actually, it's the exact opposite. It's the ultimate surrender of the ego. It's a declaration of pure existence in unbroken continuity with the divine will. It's a state where the self is so totally surrendered that only God's will remains.
Now, to counter this straightforward reading, later apologetics had to rely heavily on the hypostatic union, which is the doctrine that Jesus was somehow 100% God and 100% man simultaneously. But Bilal views this as a retroactive human-made framework. It was created specifically to explain away the scriptural contradictions of God becoming a man. He points out that this required 4 separate councils and literally centuries to define, relying entirely on Greek philosophy that Jesus himself never once mentioned or used.
So, moving along in his reasoning, a crucial point emerges. If Jesus was indeed the Messiah, which, by the way, both Christians and Muslims completely agree on, how exactly does the crucifixion fit into the picture? To figure this out, Bilal applies strict Jewish messianic standards to analyze the end of Jesus' earthly ministry.
And the historical criteria here are fascinating. In the Jewish tradition of that time, the standard was absolutely clear. A true Messiah cannot be defeated, harmed, or killed by human hands, period. Throughout history, false claimants like Judas or Simon Bar Kokhba were killed, and the very fact that they died by human power was the ultimate proof that their claims were false. So, according to the scriptural standards of the time, if human power actually succeeded in crucifying Jesus, it would literally serve as proof that he was not the Messiah.
Bilal points out that the traditional narrative of the crucifixion, where human authorities overpower and kill him, fundamentally violates those messianic criteria. Conversely, the Islamic perspective states that God raised and preserved Jesus from death. So in Bilal's final analysis, the Islamic view is actually the one that perfectly preserves Jesus' title as the Messiah, because God intervened across dimensions to protect his prophet from human defeat.
Next, he tackles the title Son of God. Bilal argues that taking this phrase literally totally ignores how broadly it was used back in the ancient world. Did you know the Old Testament applies this exact title to Adam, to the entire nation of Israel, to King David, and really to all righteous people? It was a common ancient title meant to denote an exceptional divine calling and a closeness to God's will. It wasn't about shared biology or a shared divine essence.
To dig even deeper, Bilal explores the Semitic root for father, Abba or Av. Originally, this meant gateway or threshold. It's a brilliant illustration of how translations literally shift theology over centuries. The original language metaphorically pointed to God as the ultimate source, the gateway through which a soul passes into existence. But over time, that beautiful metaphor got literalized into a biological parent.
So, as a corrective to all these translation shifts and theological drifts, Bilal leans heavily on Surah al-Ikhlas. It's this incredibly precise, short chapter of the Qur'an that serves as his ultimate theological anchor. It states definitively that God is one, the eternal refuge, who does not beget, nor was begotten, and to whom absolutely nothing is comparable. For Bilal, this reinforces that God completely transcends our human, earthly categories like gender, birth, and death.
As he starts to wrap up his scratch paper, Bilal offers a really important caution. He points out the stark difference between the pure original message of a faith and the tribalism of its followers. He urges us not to mistake the flawed, ego-driven behavior of human institutions for the faith itself. As happens so often in history, the label remains, but the spirit quietly departs. Ultimately, after all this exhaustive textual analysis, Bilal strips away the complex layers to reveal a beautifully simple, universal message. He finds that God really only ever asked 3 simple things of humanity. First, recognize the one unique ultimate being. Second, be a good person and care for others. And third, know that you will be held accountable for your actions. That's it. That is the exact same message carried by every single prophet.
And this brings us right back to the earnest heart of the author. Setting aside all the intense theology and textual analysis, Bilal's ultimate conclusion is just a profound invitation to his friend. He writes, "What I would truly love is if we could simply go together and invite someone who is hungry to sit with us." He just wants to replace these endless, circular, ego-driven debates with actual acts of shared humanity and genuine love.
Which leaves us with this final thought. If this scratch paper reveals a pursuit of truth that is this earnest and this grounded in love, shouldn't our response be the same? Are we finally ready to stop endlessly debating who is right and start focusing on loving our neighbor?
I really hope this explainer gave you a fascinating window into this mind and these ancient texts. Keep questioning, keep learning, and thanks for exploring this with me today.